So good morning, everybody. I'm here with Alex Haslam, is a professor of psychology and laureate fellow at the University of Queensland. His research focuses on the study of group and identity processes in social, organizational, health, and sport contexts. Together with over 500 colleagues around the world, he has written and/or edited 16 books and published over 350 peer-reviewed articles on these subjects. According to Google Scholar, this work has been cited over 90,000 times. Alex is a former chief editor of the European Journal of Social Psychology and currently an associate editor of the Leadership Quarterly. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Science and former president of the psychology section of the British Science Association. Recently, the third edition of The New Psychology of Leadership, Identity, Influence, and Power has been released, a book he co-authored with Stephen Reicher and Michael Plateau. Other books include The New Psychology of Sport, The Social Identity Approach, Social Psychology, Revisiting the Classic Studies. Amongst his articles, you will find Zombie Leadership, Dead Ideas That Still Walk With Us, published in the Leadership Quarterly. His latest awards include the Wegner Prize for Theoretical Innovation of the Society of Personality and Social Psychology, and he is a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to education and psychological science through research and mentoring. So, Alex, we start with the first question. Social identity paradigm offers an innovative perspective on leadership. Could you explain in simpler terms what this means to be a leader and how this theory stands apart from traditional leadership models? Thank you. Okay. So good morning, everybody. I'm here with Alex Haslam, is a professor of psychology and laureate fellow at the University of Queensland. His research focuses on the study of group and identity processes in social, organizational, health, and sport contexts. Together with over 500 colleagues around the world, he has written and/or edited 16 books and published over 350 peer-reviewed articles on these subjects. According to Google Scholar, this work has been cited over 90,000 times. Alex is a former chief editor of the European Journal of Social Psychology and currently an associate editor of the Leadership Quarterly. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Science and former president of the psychology section of the British Science Association. Recently, the third edition of The New Psychology of Leadership, Identity, Influence, and Power has been released, a book he co-authored with Stephen Reicher and Michael Plateau. Other books include The New Psychology of Sport, The Social Identity Approach, Social Psychology, Revisiting the Classic Studies. Amongst his articles, you will find Zombie Leadership, Dead Ideas That Still Walk With Us, published in the Leadership Quarterly. His latest awards include the Wegner Prize for Theoretical Innovation of the Society of Personality and Social Psychology, and he is a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to education and psychological science through research and mentoring. So, Alex, we start with the first question. Social identity paradigm offers an innovative perspective on leadership. Could you explain in simpler terms what this means to be a leader and how this theory stands apart from traditional leadership models?
And I think one of the big problems in the leadership literature is that a lot of what is called new is just old wine in new bottles. So it's a basic recycling of kind of old ideas, a bit of sprucing up, a bit of getting rid of a bit of old terminology that looks a bit old, and then putting a bit some more trendy words and so on. But basically, it's the same thing. And let's start by thinking like, what is the same thing in if you like the old or the current psychology of leadership? That's really around the idea that leadership is all about leaders. It's all about what they're like. It's about them as individuals, their individual psychology. If you like, it's the psychology of me-ness, me, the leader. And so the literature and the narratives and the discourse around leadership are all focused on the leader. They're all about what the leader does, what they're like, what their qualities are, what their attributes are, what their behaviors are, and so on and so forth. Now, those things kind of matter in a particular sense. But our argument is that actually leadership is not an I process. It's not about me, the leader. It's about us, the group that is being led by the leader. And as such, it's not an I process, it's a group process. That's really critical. It's not about the personal identity of the leader. It's about the alignment of the identity of the leader with that of the group and the members of the group, and putatively the followers. So it's about usness, and it's grounded in that sort of first person plural. So the self at the heart of leadership is the self of the group. And leaders who don't engage with that self and just, if you like, go on their merry way thinking about themselves as individuals and how great they are, and don't, if you like, tap into that group dynamic, don't understand it, don't appreciate it, don't work with it, just aren't very effective routinely. And we argue that, again, then you kind of need to rewrite the psychology of leadership with this strong group focus, again, with a focus on the self as us. One of the points I guess we make is that one of the shortcomings, major shortcomings of psychology in the last century has been that we've come to think of the self as just the individual. Well, actually, the self is collective too. So I can think of myself as me and I can think of myself as us and we, us, us Australians, us academics, us leadership researchers, us supporters of this particular football team, whatever it happens to be, us members of my family. And those things dictate and inform my behavior, my emotions, my cognitions in very powerful ways. And that's the true nature of human psychology. And leadership is a part of that process. It's not something, I'd say, grounded in, instilled in the leader as an individual. And yet, that is the view that's incredibly sort of pervasive in organizational psychological management science.
Thank you. So, do you think there's more to leadership than just making groups effective? Or, more generally, where do you find leadership?
Yeah. So okay. So that's that's an interesting question too. I mean, the simple answer to the question is you find leadership everywhere, and everywhere where there is a group and where there is an effective group, you're going to see leadership. Now, the point there is that leadership in an effective group is going to be done by every member of the group. It's going to be what we would call a leaderful group. And it's not just going to have leadership being done by the people with a formal title of leader. And again, one of the observations in our research is that if you are in a group and leadership is only being done by the people who call themselves leaders, it won't be a very effective group. And as such, then we again, I think when you say, oh, I'm studying leadership, I'm doing leadership, you naturally imagine, oh, that's in some sort of organizational, business or corporate sort of context. Because I think there's a sense in which those areas of sort of hijacked leadership as though this is our thing. Well, no. Leadership is just a group process. I mean, if you're going on holiday this weekend, with your family or with some friends, it's going to require leadership. If you're in a school and you're organizing some students to take part in some activity, that's leadership. And as I say, but you see leadership in every walk of life. It's a really, I think, a fundamental part of it. But you started the question by saying, is leadership only about making groups effective? And I mean, there's a sense in which we understand leadership and we recognize it when we see that it helps to make the groups that we're in effective. And then we say, oh yeah, there's good leadership here. Of course, in lots of contexts, we don't call it leadership. When your parents, if your parents are good parents and they look after your group, your family, you don't say, oh, they're great leaders or they're doing leadership. You just say they're doing parenting, or they were just good parents, or they were just good to us, so we don't necessarily always call it leadership. But if you think about parenting as an example, at one level, the goal of parenting, of leadership in a family domain is to make the group effective. You want you want to be effective. You want your children to be effective. You want the whole unit to be effective. But you also want it to be more than just effective. You want it to be fun. You want people in the group to be healthy and to thrive. And I think the sort of, if you like, the sort of health and well-being dimensions of leadership are just as critical as, if you like, the performance-related dimensions. And the interesting thing there too is that, again, leaders who kind of zero in and focus on social identity, on that usness, routinely are much better at making us feel good. Leaders who are only interested in themselves and their own leadership often have very deleterious effects on the mental health and well-being of other people in their group. And that's so the problem isn't just that approach, that old psychology of leadership, makes groups ineffective. It's that it makes their members kind of sick in both a physical and a sort of metaphorical sense. Yeah. So yes, good question. And again, the takeaway point is we've got to have a broader understanding of leadership than that which typically prevails in everyday discourse around it.
Okay. Just to work on that a little bit more. What's the sense of belonging to a group influence individual motivation? How does that happen?
Well, again, I think so. The social identity point is that we all have social as well as personal identities. So I'm Alex, and you started out by reading some idiosyncratic details of my sort of life, or a part of it, the sort of academic part of it. But I've got a whole load of other social identities that actually sit behind those things. I'm a psychologist. I'm an academic. I'm an Australian. I support Newcastle United. I enjoy golf. I'm a member of this neighborhood. I take part in these kind of group activities, and so on and so forth. And each of those things furnishes me with a sense of social identity. So I can say us members of the Haslam family, us Australians, us Brisbaneites, us members of Ashgrove Golf Club, us members of my work team, and so on and so forth. And leadership is about, where in those different groups I or other people do leadership, part of what they're doing is encouraging people to engage with those group memberships. So if I'm, as it were, the leader of a work team, then I'm going to get people to identify with the group and act in terms of that group membership and work to advance the interests of that group. Now, quite an important point here, and again, a really important point for sort of anchoring this discussion, is actually to be very clear about what leadership is. And it's not controversial. It's a very standard definition, and you see it everywhere. Leadership is the process of influencing people in a way that motivates them to contribute to the achievement of group goals. So leadership is about engaging followers or team members or group members in that collective process, okay? Now, again, me going on about how wonderful I am and telling you how great I am as a leader is really probably not going to do that. What I have to do is to persuade you that this group is a worthwhile group. It's worthwhile being, and what we're doing is worthwhile, and you can make a good sort of contribution to it. And explaining to me, as it were, or you, why this is a good thing for us to do, and helping each other out in that process. So again, a fundamental point here is you can't have leadership without followership, and then leadership is fundamentally about inspiring or motivating that followership. But personal identity is not a very good vehicle for doing that. I-ness is not a very good vehicle for doing that. We-ness is.
Okay. I can't but nod to what you're saying in agreement.
You can disagree, like lots of people do. So don't worry about that.
But one of the things, though, in your zombie leadership paper, you described outdated leadership ideas that persist, despite they have been shown to be, I'm not going to say false, but not true. What are some of the most resilient misconceptions? Well, why is it so difficult to move beyond them?
Yeah. I think this is, I talk about, I was giving a talk yesterday and the same question came up, and, I spend a lot of, I think the zombie leadership thing it provides a really interesting framework for this discussion, I think, because it raises lots of these issues. And I think it's kind of, and it makes people, I think, engage with them in a way that perhaps otherwise wouldn't do. and in that paper, which, if people are interested, I suggest they go and have a look at, because it was designed to be pretty sort of engaging, and also, and sort of slightly controversial, but I don't think, not for its own sake. I think we were pretty, like, when we wrote the paper, we were like, no, we just really need to get this absolutely clear, and we need to write it in a way that people understand exactly what we're saying. There's no sort of scope for like misunderstanding or misconstruing the point. And in that paper, as you say, there's quite a number of these ideas, as we say, the dead ideas that walk amongst us. And just to say there too, the idea of zombie leadership really comes from a colleague of ours, John Quiggin, who's an economist, and in the field of economics, he wrote a great book which is called Zombie Economics, and it just talks about ideas in economics that just won't die. Things like trickle down economics, or the power of self-regulating markets, the need to privatize everything to make it efficient. All these kinds of ideas you see a lot in economics, and he points out that although loads and loads of economic studies and observations and data suggest those things are wrong, they just kind of lumber on towards their targets, and there's a sense in which the people who put them forward have got a different kind of agenda, in a sense, like that this is a set of ideas that kind of work for them, and it doesn't really matter whether they're right, in general, or right for other people. It works for them. Now, the core idea, probably the sort of golden rule of zombie leadership, is just to think that leadership is all about leaders, and we've just had this big conversation explaining why that isn't the case, and I think it's self-evidently not the case, that leadership is a group process, that there's no leadership without followers, so the psychology of followers has to be important. We've said that, but the zombie leadership, no, it's all about me. And again, I think you see a lot of that in as I say, everyday discourse around leadership. If you just watch a commentary on a football match, or ask people to talk about a football team, when they're talking about leadership, they imagine that's just what the coach does, or the captain. Very straightforwardly, we've done studies of pretty much every type of football team, every type of sporting team on the planet, just about, and the basic observation is that in effective sporting teams, everybody does leadership, and of different sorts, and they do different types of leadership as the situation, as the group demands. Okay, so that's really the first one, and the others are in a particular sense of a kind of variance on that. The idea that leaders have specific qualities, or that leaders do particular things, or the idea that all leadership is basically the same. The idea, again, that leadership is something that only elites do, and it needs to be kind of rewarded as such. The idea that leadership will always make groups more effective. The more that leaders do leadership, the more effective the group will be. The idea that leadership is always good, okay, or the idea that we all need, and all groups always need, something called leadership. Each of those points you can pull apart, and you can say, well, actually, there's quite a lot of context. For example, that groups do better without a formally appointed leader, where everybody is just pulling their weight, and nobody's sort of singled out to take on the role of leader. I'll just give you one example of that. We did some work a long time ago with a guy called Rick Charlesworth, who was the coach of the Australian women's hockey team. And we had some discussions and we had some studies which showed that actually, if you had a group and you appointed someone to be a formal leader, that could actually sometimes undermine or erode the performance of the group. Because what happens is you appoint this leader, and that person then is meant to sort of do leadership, and then everybody else in the group goes, oh, well, that's all right. If they're doing leadership, I don't really need to bother anymore. They can lead it up to them, especially if you make a big song and dance about it, because you're a bit sort of cheesed off, because you see this person getting all these accolades and all the attention, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, I thought I was doing a bit on this front, but oh well, maybe not. Let's just leave it to this person. And if you lead it just to this one person to do leadership, well, it's pretty obvious that there's not going to be a lot of followership, and the team isn't going to really work. So he had the idea. Rick Charles said, like, look, I think I can see that in my own teams. So I'm going to basically just rotate the job of captain through the team, and everybody has got to have the expectation that at any particular time they'll have to step up and be the captain of the team, and we'll think about it on the day who's going to be captain for the day, but everybody has to have those skills, everybody has to be ready to do it, and we have to all recognize that we're all basically doing leadership here, right? That's the point. Okay. And they went on to win, I think they won 3 gold medals in a row at the Olympics in hockey. Okay, I mean, and I mean, of course, that there's a lot more to it than that. But I'm saying that was a real part of it. Actually, we've got other data. I mean, there's some lovely stuff in sport. Actually, really fancy. There's a great study by Bloom was done, I think, 1999, and it was looking at baseball teams and whether they had a star on the team who was paid an exorbitant amount of money relative to everybody else on the team, because they were so fantastic, this player, and they were a great leader, and they were going to drag us all along, right? Well, actually, inequality in teams like of that form between leaders and other group members, or ostensibly leaders, because of course these people don't turn out to do quite so much leadership, they're not so effective. It's very clear, the data, that actually the teams do better when you haven't got that inequality between so-called leaders and everybody else. We've just done it with a colleague of mine at the University of Exeter. We've just been doing an analysis of cricket in India, where there's really nice data on these things, and again, basically the same points borne out. So we have the idea that if we have leaders, put them on a pedestal, they'll do all the work for us. Well, nothing could be further from the truth.
Again, I'm trying not to nod too much because it was.
You're allowed. You're allowed to nod. It's not a crime. I think. I mean, actually, let's take that point. I mean, I think one of the problems is that people, when you say, I mean, I don't know. Your listeners can tell us whether they think this is a nonsense idea. But I've talked about this all around the world. I haven't. Well, I say all around the world. I'm not sure I'm going to the United States anytime soon. But yeah, people nod and they go, yeah, absolutely, this is absolutely right. And actually, we all need to nod just a little bit more, and we actually need to sort of take these ideas on and run with them a bit, and inject them into places where they need to be injected. And that could be anywhere from your local sporting team to an educational context to a business or a commercial context. I mean, there's really no context in which this isn't actually a really important idea, and that these ideas aren't really worth, exploring. I'll just give you just something at the absolute top of my head, and not nothing that, quite an idiosyncratic thing. Was I was teaching class on leadership this year, and I had I always have fantastic students, I have to say, and but I had a student, and he was in a family business, and he was saying, look, we were listening to all this stuff, and I'm thinking, I think maybe we haven't got this right in our sort of family, because we got this family business, and we've always had this idea of the patriarch as family runs the family, but actually we all know it's a bit dysfunctional, and we haven't really sort of engaged with that, and we actually need to sit down and actually work out like what we're on about, and we all need to start doing a bit of leadership. And so he went away and talked about it with the family, and they go, yeah, this is absolutely right. And he said, actually, once they started to have that discussion, then actually everything just started to make a lot more sense. And anyway, this he was saying, and actually this is going on, he's saying, actually, look, I can't believe what a transformation this has had and is having. And now I'm going to go and do this for a living. I'm going to go and work with family businesses, and say, you need to get you need to stop thinking about how this family corporation kind of works, and you need to start do this group thing, what we call identity leadership, the new psychology of leadership. Because if you don't, the least worst thing that's going to happen is that when this person dies, the firm's going to is going to die with them. So we've got to have succession, we've got to have ownership, we've got to buy, and we've got to all sit around, we've got to own the future of this organization. Well, when then you recognize that the statistics on this kind of vary, but something like 50 to 70% of people are employed in family businesses. That's a big topic, right? And but again, we sort of, we don't necessarily see it through that lens. We just think, oh yeah, this family business person doing the leading is just the person who founded the company and so on. And well, obviously something more has got to happen there for that to kind of work, because they're going to die one day.
Well, I can give you an Italian example without naming names.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Italian small businesses in very, very lucrative fields, fashion, for example, where the patriarch, who's maybe like the grandfather, maybe the great grandfather, brings up the company, and then by the time it gets to the grandsons, the internal fighting, because there is no cohesiveness within the family group, and the companies basically fail.
Yeah.
And I think many of the people who are listening to us now probably understand to which type of companies I'm referring.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should say that. I'm going to come back to when I teach around this class, I ask the students to go away and do sort of case studies of leadership, and actually this year they do it in groups as well, because I'm a big believer in groups, and apart from anything else, you can have more fun in groups than when you do things on your own. So one group did it exactly on this fashion, and they looked at different fashion houses and they said, look, what's the basic style of leadership in these different fashion houses? And they've done a pretty systematic analysis, and they were saying, well, look, some of them get this group thing, and I forget which ones they were, because I'm not much of a fashion person myself, I'm afraid. But some of them do a pretty good job, and they seem to be the ones that thrive. But the ones that have this kind of idea that it's all about this one person and what they say goes, and nobody else can have a say on things. Yeah, they have a sort of day in the sun, but around them they create a lot of toxicity and a lot of disruption, and ultimately they just don't get the buy-in that you need for people to put their shoulders to the wheel in order to make things succeed. And so you hit a rock or in the road, and everything falls to bits because basically nobody's that motivated to pick the pieces up. But if you believe in the group, then when you hit a bump, you say, okay, right, we've got to work that bit harder to sort of push through and come out the other side. You see that. To be honest, again, I say the student projects we get on this are brilliant, but you see, someone had done an analysis of startup companies. That's pretty much the classic dynamic. You start off doing the group thing, and you have everybody's doing their bit, and you're really passionate about us. And then over time, the people who started it up, again, they think it's them, it's all about them, and they're not very good at bringing other people into the tent of us. And then again, so you start off a startup with a kind of an idea, but the thing that keeps a startup kind of going is leadership, and people don't recognize they're going to need to do that. And when they do leadership, they do the wrong type of leadership. They do the me leadership, not the us leadership.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
I keep on nodding.
Yeah. Well, again, I won't hold it against you.
But okay, motivation is often seen as a very individual trait. Okay. Yet social identity paradigm suggests otherwise. How do group dynamics enhance or undermine individual motivation? Because at a certain level, you have to motivate the person.
Yep, of course you do. Yeah, well, that's the motivation is critical, as we said. The followership bit, like you've got to, again, let's go back to the definition. Leadership is the process whereby one or more members of a group influence other group members in a way that motivates them to contribute to group goals. Now, as you say, the standard approaches to motivation, the way we kind of think about motivation, actually the way we talk about it, a good example of the way we talk about it is when we write references for people, right? You write a reference for someone. Actually, when we write references for people, we pretty much always say they're motivated, and even sometimes they're not, which is an interesting point in itself. But basically, or our experience of them is that they're not that motivated. But we again, we talk about it as, this person's very motivated, that person's not very motivated. You might, let's for argument's sake, say me, and you might say, I'm very motivated. Now, firstly, there are, I would say, a range of contexts in which I'm very motivated. Like the thing about, challenging zombie leadership or putting forward this view of leadership. And I would say that too, that a key feature of that motivation is it's not just my motivation, it's a motivation I share with my colleagues. Steve Reisha, Michael Plato, Nick Steffens, Naomi Ellis, Kim Peters, a whole set of people who we work together on all these ideas. So actually, again, part of it would be a total fiction, for example, to imagine, oh, these ideas, they're all about me, or this work is all about me. It's a group project, right? Now, that group and the things and what we do in that group and the importance of that group for me is an absolutely critical motivator. Really classic work going right back to Levine shows that actually most of our motivations are grounded in group membership. And actually, I'm here in London at the moment, and my wife isn't with me, and normally she's with me, and I just noticed that when I'm on my own, there's things that we do together, like go walking or go out and socialize and stuff. And without her, I just sort of lounge around a bit, or don't do very much. I try, but it's a bit feeble. I think other people are a huge source of motivation in our lives, and it's a bit like, apart from anything else, they just say like, well, get off the couch, or let's go and do something, or they have things to do. The group has things and you go along, and then and then you get involved. Okay, actually, as I say, the idea of intrinsic motivation is slightly misleading, because the idea of intrinsic motivation is that you are become very self-motivated, and it's just, oh look, I just really want to do that. Now that is absolutely true. Intrinsic motivation is where I say I really want to do that. But actually, the source of that motivation is extrinsic, in the sense that it comes typically from other people. But the point is, those are other people with whom you share social identity. So it is intrinsic, but not to the personal self, to the collective self. So again, if you think about why people went off and fought in the First World War, they didn't do it because for their own personal good. When people go off to war, this is a very bad idea. Going off to war is a very bad thing to do for yourself as an individual, because there's a very good chance you're going to get hurt. That's the thing. But what motivates you to do is obviously the group cause. You care about your country or your community or a set of values, your political principles, whatever it might be. Okay. And on that basis, you say, actually, no, I believe in the collective, and therefore I want to contribute to it. Now, you're also going to need some kind of leadership that persuades you that is indeed a worthwhile group, and that this activity is worthwhile engaging in. You don't just go off and walk, you don't just go off in a group and start shooting people or whatever it might be. No, you need people to come up with a narrative about like why we need to do this, and you need that person to do some kind of group work, identity work, what we call identity leadership. But again, the motivation, the foundations of the motivation are social. And again, I would say to your listeners, just think. So many of whom, requires a certain type of motivation to listen to a program like this, or engage in a course, or whatever the thing might be. And I would argue that the thing that routinely gets you into those things is kind of leadership of a particular form, but leadership that also makes the case for us and makes the case for the value of a particular thing. And I would say most of the things that I do are motivated by some sort of collective. I mean, when I do the washing up, right? When I do the washing up, that's because I want the house to be tidy for us. When I'm here on my own, there's a lot of shit in the sink.
Yes. No comment.
Yeah.
So, in all of this, what sort of factors help create a workplace environment where team members develop this collective identity and feel engaged?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting question. Yeah, and again, I think the answer to that is it depends, and in a way, every group is different. Like and one of the kind of principles of zombie leadership is all leadership is not the same, because all groups are different, right? So what it's going to depend on the nature of the team and its norms and its values and the work it does. And one of the goals of leadership is to understand those things, understand who we are, and like what makes us tick. Okay, that's really the first principle. So one of the things there about like effective leadership is don't come into a group and just say, oh, look, I'm a brilliant leader. I think we should do this, 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 and this. Effective leadership is about listening to the group and finding out about the group. We've got, again, I mentioned Kim Peters. We did a study with kind of Marines in which we were looking at people who were training to be commandos. And one of the things that we found, and we were doing a longitudinal study looking at who emerged from this commando training as leaders. Was it the people who came in and said, I want to be a leader and I'm a great leader? Or was it the people who said, I want to be a good group member and I want to be, and I want to understand what the group is about? You know what the answer is because we're having, you got the thing. But the point there is you need to be that person if you're going to do this. So next time you're in a leadership kind of role, go in and surprise people by saying, look, the first thing I want to do is find out about this group. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a minute, but just start by just telling me what this group means to you and what you enjoy about it and what you most value about it. And actually, I'd be very surprised if you don't get positive results from doing that. And then use that as a guide for what you need to do and what form your leadership needs to take. So what are you really trying to do? Where are you really wanting to go? What would you like us to be in 2 years' time? What do we need to do? What are the big things we need to, the dragons we need to slay to get there? What are the mountains we need to climb? Okay. And then once you've got a sense of that, you're gonna go after the right mountains. You're not going to climb. Too many leaders take their groups up the wrong mountains, and that's why their leadership fails. That's why things like 80% of organizational change fails, because you picked the wrong mountain.
Okay. Well, you sort of anticipated my last question. What other concrete, you mentioned something, walk into the group and have them present themselves and what the group means to them before you talk about yourself. That's one sort of concrete thing that you can start doing. What other sort of concrete suggestions can you give us, which is not going to be exhaustive, obviously? Okay. There's
I mean, and the other point there is, I think leadership that takes you towards the group and gives you the confidence to engage with the group is basically always going to be better than any kind of leadership that takes you away from the group. So one of the sort of observations I make there is like, and I've got, again, lovely data from meta-analyses on these kinds of points, but leadership training involves going away on a 3-day retreat to kind of like with a couple of other people to kind of pontificate with your spreadsheet about your group or your organization often is not very productive. And the reason for that is actually you need the people that are going to be doing this work kind of in the room psychologically, if not physically. So ultimately you're going to have to do some work with them, and you can't do leadership, as it were, by spreadsheet. You need, and one of the problems in the kind of leadership industry is there's too much of this stuff, which is just, oh, I'm going to give you this big idea, you're going to reflect on it, and then somehow miraculously you're going to be a great leader and the group your lead is going to be transformed. That's not going to happen. Okay, so basically anything that takes you towards the group and helps you to engage with it and understand it and work together to build that identification, that sense of purpose, and also at the same time, have a sense of psychological safety so that you can take on board new ideas and you can ask critical questions. So this isn't about just saying, oh, look, anything goes and just all about sort of conformity in some sense. Absolutely not. And indeed, actually, one of the things that we see there is in groups that have a really strong sense of identity and belief in the group, actually you tend to get less of conformity around kind of bad ideas because people care so much about the group. When they have a bad idea, they say, no, look, hang on a minute, I've got to put my hand out here. This isn't a good thing. And you want those people coming up with the sort of critical ideas. So, I mean, I think in our own work and when we try to turn these into sort of concrete interventions and activities for leaders to do. And again, you can read the leadership book to get sort of more detail on that. I mean, as I said, I think it needs to start by finding out, what are people's social identities? What does the group mean to people, and how does it align with other important groups in their lives? I think that's a pretty good place to start, and we do sort of kind of mapping type stuff around that. Then I think you need to do some, group goal setting. So, and the framework we've sort of developed for that is, often people talk about SMART goals. We use a slightly different terminology, which is right goals, and this is collective group goal setting. So let's come up with goals that are realistic, implementable, timely, and engaging, that we want to engage with. So that's slightly different. I mean, I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with the kind of acronym SMART, which is a bit more abstract. These are things that are really focused on what works for us. So sit down and do that goal setting. Potentially, if there's subgroups within your bigger group, get them to do their own bit of goal setting around that, and present that to the group, and then try to work out how you're going to get alignment between those kind of multiple identities, and then obviously put in place, structures around those things that are going to help you to achieve those goals. If we're going to try and do this thing, are there any sort of fundamental things that we need to be resourcing, whatever it is? So allocate resources to support the group, not just again, the investment of resources around to support group ambition is really critical. I think much more, and it's a much evidence. So just as it were, spending money on stuff, technology would be a case in point. Organizations waste billions and billions of dollars on technology that nobody uses because it's not part of a group plan. I had a very good friend who worked for a big software company, one of the biggest in the world, and he was quite high up in it. And he said, like, what they know is that they sell the next version of their program on all the doody bits that are added on, and the tricksy bits there. And what they know is that users use about 2% of those. So the buyers buy them because they like these things, and this is true of computer systems and technology generally. Oh, the salesperson comes around and shows them how wonderful this thing is, and they go, "Oh yeah, we've got to have that," and they persuade them. Actually, they use identity leadership to persuade them that they need to do it. They say other groups have got this thing and they're very effective and sort of thing. And you think, oh well, we need to kind of really have that. And then you spend that money, and the team are going, yeah, but we didn't want that, and we didn't ask for that. And actually, what we really wanted was you to appoint someone to do our bookkeeping for us, or someone to organise our meetings, or just someone in this role. And so they can be they're not at all grateful for that, and they will never engage with that technology. And again, I mean, that's the history of, or the story of, procurement in a whole raft of industries and sectors, is that it's not, procurement is leadership, right? But it's leadership that's routinely not about the groups that are being led, and that's where it goes wrong. Okay. That's a whole other piece, actually, to be honest. I've never made that point to my knowledge before, but I'm just thinking to myself, okay, we've got to go and look at procurement now, because that's a big topic, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're talking to an ex-programmer, ex-systems analyst, and
yeah, but it's right, though, isn't it? I mean, that is a thing.
It was one of my beefs. I mean, often they have us write stuff that we knew the clients didn't know we were going to write it, and we knew they probably weren't going to use it.
Yeah, and of course that's part, it's a bit like my grandma used to say, Mr. Coleman made his money from the mustard that people left on the side of their plate. So it's that, isn't it? Like, yeah. So that, but yes. So look, I think that's a whole thing. I mean, that's a whopping great topic right there, right? So maybe that's another program for you to think about. But when I think about that, I think actually, yeah, we haven't made that connection with procurement, and actually that's actually incredibly important, because I think that's an aspect of change that we just assume that procurement is just about getting the best stuff we possibly can, and that isn't what good procurement is about. Good procurement is about getting the stuff that we really need, and prioritizing that, and also that people are going to be grateful for. Again, when you say that, I've got so many stories I would like to share, but I think they'd be breaching all manner of things. I could tell some whopping stories there. But about now, I think and I'm thinking particularly about the amount of money that organizations spend on things like HR kind of infrastructure and these things that cost an absolute arm. I mean, an arm and a leg it's lots and lots of arms and lots of legs.
Right. Yeah, let's avoid getting ourselves sued.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't name anybody there. Yeah,
Uh,
I think, yeah, but it applies to them all. To be honest, it applies to
yeah.
them all. So don't. So you can project whatever organization or company you want onto this, because I think it's a truth that's universally lived out in organizational life.
Okay, well, I really appreciate the time you gave us. And I will stop the recording now.
Ora
do
si
that.
registrerà la conferenza.
Go for it. I'm sorry.
Well, why don't you just start by just saying, oh, look, so thanks very much for the discussion. And are there any things you'd like to say in closing or anything like that? Maybe.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to say to add before we finish?
No, well, no, not really. I mean, I think, to be honest, I mean, in many ways, yes, there is. In the sense, I think this conversation, I think we could happily talk for several hours. I find this stuff really interesting, and I think your questions have been great, and I think all the questions in this space are interesting. So I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity to do it. So I thank you for taking the time to contact me and stuff, and thank you to all the listeners who've tuned in as well to hopefully what's been a reasonably interesting discussion. Hopefully it's stimulated your thinking around this area. I think there's a lot more kind of reading that anybody can do and engage in, and if there's any things that you can't access that we talked about, like our book or article, then do reach out to me, and I'm very happy to sort of pass those on. But more generally, I hope that you find these ideas not just things that are kind of interesting, but things you can actually start to build on to maybe change the important groups in your life, and maybe change the way that you think about doing leadership in the groups that you lead, to not only, as we've said, like make them more effective, but make them healthier groups, and in the process, hopefully, kind of make the world that we inhabit a place that's a lot more psychologically safe, a lot more positive, a lot more kind of meaningful, and in a particular sense, something that we can all collectively own and participate in, and not in a world where we can be part of the leadership process and not just have leadership done to us.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all of that. And